Hey guys, Sky Hyper V here once again, and we're going to talk today about change addresses. Now, when it comes to crypto change addresses in wallets after a transaction, it causes a concern for folks that don't understand what's actually happening behind the scenes. And sometimes when you have a key stored or a private key dumped for a particular address, and then the funds are stored in a change address, there's a likelihood that you may lose those funds or lose access to those funds if you're not careful. So let's talk a little bit about how change addresses work, what they are, and how to avoid having your funds inaccessible. So what is a change address? Change address is very much similar to how you deal with real change with money. You give some amount tendered for a particular item, right? In this case, a transaction is occurring. So you're sending some amount out and some amount comes back to you. And that in the real world is your change. Similarly, in crypto, when you send some funds out of your wallet, the change comes back to what's called a change address. And it's there specifically generated by your wallet for the purposes of storing change. And what was the reasoning behind that? So we're going to talk a little bit about the general concept of change addresses here, and then we'll show a real example using the using a crypto wallet. So the purpose of the change address was anonymity, or what we say pseudo-anonymity, right? So when Satoshi Nakamoto, he, she, or them, created Bitcoin, originally the purpose of the transaction was to remain as anonymous as possible. So when you send some money out of a input or one of your addresses from an address, right, something that's storing the funds, and some change comes back, it comes to a new address, and the purpose was to keep somewhat anonymous. Now there is now of course this was back 10 years ago, right? But now there's chain analysis software that allows you to backtrack and figure out where the source of the funds were from. Even though you don't know the person or persons behind that transaction, you can kind of track that it's from the same wallet. But the whole purpose was for anonymity, or what I call pseudo-anonymity, because it's not really truly anonymous. And Satoshi didn't want address reuse. So using the same address constantly, even though it's convenient to us because we can store one private key and have access to those funds, it was not the intention of the original developer or developers. It was to discourage address reuse. So let's talk a little bit about what makes change. Right now, the way the blockchain works, it's simply a combination of inputs and outputs. Right? That is all the blockchain is. It is an input-output machine. So all it's doing is taking some transaction, sending it to where you intended, and then it's giving you some change back. So let's talk a little bit about, just give you a crude example of what I mean by input and output. And then we'll kind of do a grocery store example, and then we'll actually do a real wallet example. So imagine I have 1,000 of some crypto, we'll just call this X, okay? And I need to send, right? I need to send some amount to someone. Now we're going to ignore fees and all that jazz to make sure that we don't deal with fractions and decimals. Just work with whole numbers to make it easy, make the point across. So I imagine that I had in my wallet what's called one input. Okay, imagine this is basically a $1,000 bill, if you will, right? The way things work in crypto space is when you have inside your wallet, you have a selection of inputs. And these are, let's say, denominations that can be used as inputs into some transaction. Okay, that's why they're called inputs, because they're input into a transaction. So similarly to your wallet, If you have a $20 bill, a $10 bill, and $5 bill, these are three inputs. You could tell somebody that you have $35, right? So if you have a wallet here with a $5 bill, a $20 bill, and a $10 bill, you could tell somebody that you have $35. That is your wallet balance. But in fact, you have separate inputs here. So when you tell somebody you have $35, that is your total wallet capacity or your fund balance. But it's made up of three separate inputs, a 5 input, a 20 input, and a 10 input. In this case, the dollars are irrelevant, right? And crypto is just the coin. So imagine that you had a 1,000 input. It has one input. It's been combined, and through a process I'll show later, it's one big input of 1,000. So if I need to send, right, here I am, and here's somebody I need to send money to, right? And here's my wallet with 1,000, but I need to send them 50. Put here to select from. There's no way to use smaller inputs because I have one combined input. It's like the 5, the 20, and the 10, right? If I had to send a $1, I have to use one of these larger inputs, maybe the $5. If I have to send 21 or 30, I have to use several inputs. I can't just, I don't have ones, I don't have a smaller denomination, right? These are not broken up into 50s or 20s or 10s. This is one big input of 1,000. I want to send 50 over to someone. So the 1,000 becomes the input in the blockchain, and the blockchain creates two outputs. These are the outputs. The 50 and a 950. We're just ignoring fees here. So this 50 is going to go to this individual or their wallet, right? Their address, whether they have control over it or not, it's irrelevant here. The point is the blockchain says I'm going to send 50. That's now controllable by this wallet. And it's going to put 950 in what's called a change address. The wallet generates a brand new address for your coin X, right? So originally your 1,000 of your X coin was held in some address and controlled by the private key for that address. Now you've sent 50, so you've broken up this input into a 50 and 950 into two outputs, and that 50 went to the individual's wallet or controlled by it, and the 950 comes back to you in this change. Or actually, let's extend this. So now this isn't a change address. So now you have 950 sitting by itself. Okay. If I were to send another 50 to this individual, then what would come out is 50 and 900. Again, 50 goes to this individual, and 9 will go to a new change address within this coin's wallet. Another change address. You'll create another one because these wallets are deterministic, right? They'll create a set of keys or have a pool of keys that they can generate from a master private key. It creates a public address, and then the private component, which is not typically seen unless you do a dump private key. You can look at my video I already have on my channel that shows how to dump private keys, and so there's a private key pair there that controls these funds. So imagine that you only, if you follow my original video and you only had your private key for this address, the address that held the 1,000 initially, and when it went through a set of transactions and became change, if you did not send this entire change back to this address, then if that wallet were to get corrupt, or you lose it or something happens, and you just re-import your private key back into your wallet, thinking that 1,000 or the 900 or 950 will come back, it will no longer be accessible, right? The wallet has all the private keys. You need to dump each one or send the change back to the main address, which goes against the original spec, which was why Satoshi wanted to avoid address reuse. But for us, it's convenient, right? So now we're storing tons of private keys for every particular change address we may run into. We'll show all that in a real example in a little bit. So let's talk about a grocery store example, right? So in this case, I only showed the one input being split. But now let's look at our grocery store example. So let's divert our attention here to this wallet. I have a $5 bill, a $20 bill, and a $10 bill in my wallet. So I have $35 worth of spendable money, right? In this case, the denomination dollars. So I buy a bunch of stuff, and I have a $16 total, right? That I bought a bunch of stuff at the grocery store. I'm sitting in line, and I owe $16. So now as the spender, right, in this case, in the wallets, in the crypto wallet scenario, the spender is the algorithm or the source code of the wallet that decides what inputs to use. In this case, you are going to scan through here and decide which one of these things, and by the way, we can use coin control in a wallet. I'll show you to decide which inputs we actually want to use, so the wallet doesn't have to determine it itself. But if you don't choose coin control, it will just choose one of the inputs that satisfies that transaction need. So in this case, in the real world scenario, I have $16 I want to spend. I certainly can't send a 5. That's not going to meet the transaction total. I can't spend the 5 and the 10 inputs. That's not going to meet the transaction total. I would spend the 20, right? So the $20 bill becomes my input, and I get 2 outputs. Again, we're ignoring fees for a moment, right? These are your outputs. And you will see this in the blockchain, which again, we will show in a real concrete example later. I have 2 outputs. The $16 to originally satisfy my total of the goods that I purchased. And the $4 goes back into my wallet as change. And you would think in the real world with dollars, there's no $4 bill, right? So you would get 1, 1, 1, 1. You get 4 $1 bills. But in wallets, in crypto wallets, there's no concept of units. You get a holistic of 4 input, right? Because in this case, it's not dollars, it's just that coin. So you would have in your crypto wallet, you would have a 5, a 4, and a 10. Whereas in a real world example, you would have a bunch of $1 bills, which can then satisfy some smaller unit of transaction at a later date. So that's the basic concept of input and output, right? The entire blockchain is just one input-output machine. With this example, and imagine that we spend $2. So now on our second spend, we have a $2 total. We just bought some small item, but our wallet now has $5, or a 5, a 4, and a 10. So we'll use the smallest input to satisfy that condition. So this $4 here would be split into a $2. So the $4 becomes our input. Okay. We get a $2 and a $2 as outputs. And the same thing happens again and again until this becomes what's called dust or microtransactions. And eventually you need to, since you can't spend from it, you need to then combine it into a bigger whole, which will show you using coin control. So that's the theory and the drawing or diagrams around how input and output work within a wallet. Let's go to the real world and look at a crypto wallet, and we'll go through an example and we'll show you how it looks actually in Block Explorer. All right, so I have a wallet here for testing purposes. So I think some defunct project. I don't know if this thing is still going or not, but the blockchain is still moving, so that should be sufficient for us to do a quick test. So we talked a little bit about how the blockchain is just a bunch of inputs and outputs. Right? Every time you look at an address, you will see the transaction history of that particular address. And if you look at the hash for that particular transaction, you will see an input, and on the right side, you'll see some output. As you can see, there was an input here, and these are the 2 outputs. So let's look at that from an actual real-world scenario where we're sending out some coins. Currently, my balance here in Argo is 631.69 of spendable coins. Okay, these are the coins I can spend. You can see I can select inputs. It's coin control features. If you have a wallet that's just recently installed, you can go to your tools and settings in Windows, or in Mac, you just go to your preferences here. And under wallet, you can enable coin control features and then hit OK. And and then you'll have a fee, section here that allows you to control what inputs you can select. So let's go to inputs. Now I mentioned in the first section of the video that an input, regardless of how large, is one combined input into the blockchain. It cannot be further divisible until it goes through a transaction. So in this particular case, I have 631.69, but let's see how many inputs that's in. So I have a 400 input and a 231.69, which makes my entire spendable amount the 631. So if I select all here, you can see my spendable is 631.69. So let's go ahead and send some coins out to a random address. So I'm just going to go to the rich list here and make this person a little bit richer, number one rich individual. And I'm going to decide how much I want to send. And I can even select which input I want to send from. So imagine right now, if I wanted to send out 100, it would select this input. But if for some reason, because I'm staking and I have a really high confirmation, for example, let's say I had a high confirmation on here and I didn't want to break up that input, because when you're staking, every time you send a transaction out of that input, it resets your staking time. So just be aware of that. That's why people use coin controls to spend from another input that may have a lower confirmation, and they don't mind resetting that. So when you click on, you can select one of the ones to spend, but I'm not going to select on any of them. I'm just going to say that I want to send 50 to this address. Okay, I haven't put a custom change address in or anything like that. So let's go and hit send. Fees, whatnot, let's go and pay those fees. So I just sent out 50. Now if you look at my coin control, naturally, because it was a small amount or smaller, I had an input small enough to satisfy that, it selected one of these inputs. If I had sent a little larger than this, it will select both the inputs, so we'll show that in a little bit. But you can see here that my 400 input is unchanged, unmodified, and it was the 231 that was used to send out my 50. And now I have this change of 181. Now look at what happened. I got a new change address. So this was my original address where both of my inputs were, and I got some change. So let's go ahead and look at this particular transaction. So if I go over here to the transaction field and I find the transaction ID, I can put this into a block explorer and look at my input and output, right? It came from this address. It pulled the 231.69 as my input, and it sent 50 to this address and gave me change of 181 in this address. So in this case, my wallet created this change address. If I dump this private key, like I've shown in other videos, my main address, right? Even if you go to your receive addresses, or some wallets just have it on the left column here. If you go to receive addresses, you see I only have the one main address. I don't have other addresses showing up in here, because these are change addresses that are not typically, they're meant to just be discarded as transactions occur around them. They're not meant to be stored. So if I dumped my private key for this long ago, because I had all 600 of my coins inside that address, or controlled by the private key behind that address, and I were to go into a new wallet right now and import that private key, I would only get the 400 because this 181 is in another address. Now let's go ahead and send a larger amount. Now if I come into debug console and I type in list address groupings, you can see that I have my main address. These are, when you type list address groupings, it shows you all the addresses that have ever been part of a transaction, part of an input, right? So when you get some balance, like in this case, I have 400 at this address, 181 at this address. These two were part of some transaction long ago, but they have a zero balance now. Now I'm going to send the entire amount. Let's just send a larger amount actually than 181, but under my 581 total. So let's go ahead and send about 200 to that same address. So let's pull up that individual's address. So we'll copy the address and we'll send 200 out. Right? These are all spendable coins. Right? my 50 is still having it's still being confirmed on the blockchain, but that's okay because the wallet lets me spend my change, right? Or my current balance, which is 581. So I'm going to send 200. The reason I'm doing this is because I want it to be slightly larger than this so that it impacts both inputs. Okay, let's see what happens when I do that. Or sorry, in this case, let's do a little bit larger amount so that it impacts both addresses, because if I put 200, it will select this address. So I've got 581, but I want to send it a little bit higher than 400. So I'm going to send 410 so that it impacts both addresses. Or both inputs, rather. Now if I go to my inputs, you can see that all of my change addresses, both my other two are gone, and I have 171 in here. If I go back to debug console and type list address groupings again, you can see I have yet another address. So this one was the balance of 0, this one was the balance of 0, this one had the 181, which is now 0, it's been cleared out. This was my main address that had 400, which has also been cleared out because they were both used as inputs, right? So if I look at the transaction, let's go to this transaction. We'll wait for one block to, now that shows at least one confirmed. Let's look at that transaction hash. Now you can see that I was trying to send a total of 410 to some address. It had to use both of my inputs. So it took inputs from the remaining that I had, the two addresses, and it sent 410 to that original address I wanted to send to, and it sent 171 back to a brand new change address. See, these addresses are nothing like this one. It's a completely new change address. So again, be careful that if you have transactions and you've sent them out, that the change comes back to some other address and you may not have the private key for this. So I either have to dump the private key, I can copy this and do a dump private key, or I can go ahead and send this back out to my main address. So here's my main address. So I'm going to go ahead and send my balance. I'm going to select that input, and up here will give me an after fee amount, which I can copy. So if I want to literally scrub the entire balance, including fractional amounts, I can copy that. I can send this. And what I will have is all my coins back in this main address, which I do have the private key for. Get coins sent to you to some address, whatever that address is. Every single time somebody sends you new coins, they're going to be separate inputs. They do not get recombined unless you come in here and recombine them. So a lot of people that are getting stake rewards, masternode rewards, or just typical transactions that are coming in from other parties, they'll keep creating new transactions here, or new inputs. You have to select them all and resend them back to some main address like I showed you here with the after fee, and that will recombine everything. That's called dusting your wallet. Right? In most cases, people like to combine the coins in their wallet because they want to have a higher staking weight for wallets that still do the older proof of stake with the percentages and all that good stuff I've shown before in my staking efficient video. So let's see if that's been confirmed. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and now show you how to manage this particular address. See, it's my main address, which I want. Now I'm going to send, let's send this individual another 10, but this time we don't want it to create a change address. So what do? We're going to put the pay to for that individual. I want to send 10, and if I did this, immediately would use 10 from this one single input and I would get change back. So I'm going to put my own address for this particular wallet into the custom change address field. Okay, which is my main address. So I'm saying I want to send 10 coins out to this, but put my change back into this address. So let's go ahead and send that out. I'm going to undo the custom change for now. Now that that's being confirmed a little bit, let's go and check. You can see that my address now has, I used the wrong address here, oops, let's get my receiving address. So let's get my main address again, paste it in here, and Block Explorer is showing me a balance of 161. You can see here, if I look at my last transaction, 171 was sent out. I sent 10 to somebody, and then look at these two addresses are exactly the same because I put a custom change address telling it to send it right back to me. If I go to inputs, it even has my label here because it's my main address, and there it is with the GM at the end, and 161 is still in my main address for which I have the private key. One of the caveats when I say a change address that you don't have a private key for, people say, well, if I don't have the private key and I have the private key for the main one and I have funds in those change addresses, what do I do immediately? Well, you don't need to keep dumping your private keys. You can if you like for all those change addresses, but the wallet.dat file is your deterministic wallet. It holds all of the potential keys that will be generated off the master wallet.dat. So you keep that wallet safe. But in addition to that, because it's software, right? A file can get lost, it can get deleted. You may forget your passphrase to be able to control the funds, right? You can't send stuff out. So that's why a lot of people lean towards keeping all their coins in one address. Now, it doesn't have to be in one input, but one address, right? So if somebody sends me some coins, and then I send those coins out again, a portion of them, and some of them come back as change, they'll be in a change address. I can come in here and select all of my inputs, paste in my own address, and do the copy after fee, send that off, and I will have all my coins back in one address. And you can verify that by going to inputs and just making sure that they all show under the same address so that you can be rest assured that if something happened to your wallet.dat, you can open a new wallet.dat with a brand new address, import your private key, and you'll have control over your funds once again. So I hope this was useful information. Feel free to leave comments below or questions if you have any. Thanks.